hello and welcome to the third in our series with working with Green Story on behalf of Impact Plus. We are going to today focus on communicating transparency, enabling us to craft effective sustainability messages for enhanced stakeholder trust and brand reputation. I am Prof.Anne Peirson-Smith from Northumbria University. I'm a research project co-I, along with my colleague Alana, who will introduce herself in a moment, on the Impact Plus projects. I also have a PR, branding, professional communication background, and I teach in this field and research and publish. And now I'm going to hand over to Alana to introduce herself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you again for this third and final part of our webinar series. So as I feel like I've been introduced a couple of times, but my name's Dr. Alana James. I'm an associate professor in fashion at Northumbria University. And I currently lead a large-scale research project, which is entitled Impact Plus, which challenges the way that environmental impact is assessed and measured across the entire global value chain. So we work really closely with Green Story. They're one of our project partners. They have been since the beginning of the project. And we're working really closely in a number of ways, one of which is this webinar series. So Anne and I are from complementary backgrounds. So I'm from a design background. I use lots of different design methods and approaches to create sustainable innovation within the value chain. So combined with our kind of background in communication and design and sustainability, we're hoping today to guide you through this third and final part of the crafting transparency webinar. So today's session, obviously we're academics, we like to have our objectives right at the very beginning. So we are looking to identify and evaluate sustainable communication objectives, some of which we've talked about in previous sessions. So if you were unable to make those sessions, then I encourage you to go back to those kind of more basic principles we talked about right at the very beginning. We're going to focus a little bit today on audience, so locating and accessing that audience, and ensuring that that navigation of legislative landscape is successful and effective. So you're not only just doing the right thing, but saying the right thing and doing that in a very ethical and working within a compliant way within that communication. We're going to talk a little bit around narrative and story, so how we actually devise those stories that we're wanting to tell and communicate them in a meaningful and effective way. And again, we're going to emphasize how you do that whilst enhancing trust. We've talked about this kind of devising stories and narratives previously, but actually we're moving that on today to talk a little bit more and focus a bit more on trust. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about different channels, in particular social media, and we're also going to look at various case studies that you can take as inspiration to back to your own practice as well. Hopefully at the end we're going to have some time for some questions and discussion as well. So we've spoke about this before, but just right at the very beginning we like to frame exactly what we're talking about. So and we've just discussed the aims and the objectives of today's session, but we are framing this within a very sustainable global holistic value chain. So I think it very much channels the values of the project that we're working on as well. So we don't have this very isolated approach as we see a lot within sustainability. We try and take this much more holistic approach. And when it comes to communication, there's kind of 4 key areas. And again, we've covered these in a lot more detail previously, but we like to frame the key audience. We like to focus on positive outcomes and kind of the end goal, what we're trying to achieve through this effective communication. We're trying to shift that narrative in fashion to a much more sustainable, responsible, both in terms of brand practices, but also in consumer behaviours as well. And all of this has to be wrapped up and really communicated effectively. And obviously without without unauthentic or any kind of greenwashing messaging as well. So they're kind of our 4 principles that we've kind of really stayed true to throughout these webinars. So as we've already mentioned, this is stage 3. And I'm going to go over very briefly stage 1 and 2. So for those of you who couldn't join us previously, you get a flavour of what we've talked about previously. So I'm going to go straight into those instead of talking through them here, because we've got a little bit more detail on these slides. So in stage 1, back much earlier in the year when we started these webinars, we were talking about laying the foundations. So we went back to those kind of core principles that I touched upon a few moments ago. So we talked around the narrative and the story being authentic and credible, and that's the way that we're going to build trust within our communication journeys. We talked about looking inside and outside of your businesses, because obviously that's hugely crucial, not to just kind of be blinkered and working in your own space, but actually being quite perceptive and open to what's going on around us across the landscape. We also talked about the kind of top-down approaches as well. So how we stay compliant, how we can be agile and responsive to more legislative changes, many of which are coming through the value chain at the moment. We talked around comparing sustainable positioning and ensuring that actually not only do we understand that landscape, but we're containing within and working within those trends that are happening. So we're remaining competitive and we're remaining comparable to our competitors in the market. But fundamentally, this has to be done by connecting with people. So again, we talked quite a lot at length around audience. Who is that person? Who are those people that we're trying to get that message across to? So that was stage 1. And again, they are available online. So if you're wanting to go back and catch up on any of those points, I really would encourage you to do that. Stage 2, we talked much more around the messaging, the communication, and what should be communicated and potentially what shouldn't be communicated as well. So we talked around how we define sustainability stories, and everybody in the room and everybody who watches this back, your sustainability story is going to be quite different. So it's about really getting to grips with the message that you want to communicate to an outward facing market. We also wanted you to discuss and consider the diverse audiences that you're going to be talking to. I don't think any one company has one audience or one beneficiary group. So it's understanding the full breadth of people that you're wanting to reach out to through your sustainable communications. Obviously, this has to be from within. So we also talked around looking at your ESG strategies, your sustainability goals, and actually coming back true to your values before you start to really think about that outward communication. But also acknowledging change. I mean, I think it's the elephant in the room is that this is a hugely agile landscape and very, very fluid in terms of its actions at the moment. So it's about being kind of keeping on top of things, but being agile enough to be able to change and respond to some of those changes as well. So moving on to today, and again, we're not going to go into too much detail here. It's not a recap, it's kind of setting the scene for what Anne's going to be talking to you about in just a few moments' time. But we are going to be looking at communication objectives today. So again, coming back to some of those core principles and really kind of solidifying exactly what we're wanting to get out of these 3 sessions. It's about locating and accessing the key audiences, as we said previously. So we have talked about audience in more depth, but we're going to kind of come back to that. And it's almost kind of a key takeaway and a reminder around not just locating, but speaking the right language for the right audience. We're going to spend a little bit more time around narrative and story. And again, thinking about that authentic story that is true to your values and reflective of your company values as well. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on channels, as I mentioned earlier. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Thank you, Alana. So the next stage of our analysis today is going to focus on the communication channels as a way of communicating your story. It's about telling sustainability stories that will make an impact on your target audience. So we've got to choose communication channels basically that are relevant with your target audience. And in previous presentation, we actually outlined how we identify our targets, how we segment them, and how we become aware of them, know who we're talking to, which is very important. So we can share updates, engage with stakeholders, and inspire further conversations with them. So we're also thinking about how these channels can support and complement each other. And of course, we've got a whole universe of channels out there, both sort of traditional broadcast and social media like LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and also your website, where you can have a dedicated sustainability section. And you basically think about how these choices that you make in your media channels for your stories can play different roles, can sort of complement each other and speak to different audiences at the same time. Here, in terms of approaching that, is what we've called the SOEP model. This is actually a reworking of what was called originally the PESO model, but fundamentally it's about shared, owned, earned, and paid media. And it basically offers an integrated communications approach, allowing us to holistically plan and measure and enable us to identify selective communication sort of channels across your sort of sustainability campaign, as an example. And this is really important because it sort of also this model here enables you to understand that your shared media, which is your social networks, your owned media, your website, blogs and socials, your earned media, your mention shares, likes and reviews, and your paid media, more traditional advertising and paid media placements, advertorials, all actually come together and can come together in a variety of ways. So they all overlap. They're not sort of discrete. But at the same time, in terms of the ordering of this model, putting shared media first highlights how important social media has become, and also the strategic use of owned media that we can sort of manage effectively ourselves, and think about, how we use that and what sort of content we develop and what sort of sustainability narratives we are going to sort of put together to put out to our target audiences. So it's all about starting communicating, enabling you to sort of, get sort of credit for your sustainability efforts and report on your sustainability performance through these sort of selected channels, communication channels for your sort of segmented target audiences and stakeholders, because you're building this larger internal and external engagement with your sustainability story. And note there, we've also added internal along with external, because our employees and also our B2B sort of partners are also very important in terms of understanding our sustainability story, because they're all part of that journey. So we can also use our sort of extended PR and branding tools to do that. And really, the key considerations here are about authenticity and consistency. As I've said already, we're adapting our sort of sustainability message to each of your communication platforms you're choosing, each of their unique characteristics. And you're trying to sort of create appealing, multimodal, visual, verbal, oral content to get and to reach your target audience, to basically engage them with your story. Here we have a case study example of a brand called Bottle Top, and they basically emphasize, they use bottle tops basically they recycle them into accessories, particularly you can see bags here. It's based in Brazil. It's all handcrafted, and they are sort of a very interesting sustainability story. They focus on craft, but they also use social media to share their story using influencers. And this enables the company, the brand, to be more personalized, and they have a sort of a significant brand community following as a consequence. So it's a very good example there. So we're really looking at widening our reach in a staged and considered way. We're sort of basically choosing our social media channels relevant to our objectives in a sort of consumer-facing way. We're basically segmenting our audience, as we've said, and we're reviewing what we've done, and we're trying to get that message out. And we do that where we can, and we can create newsworthy, memorable events and triggering events. We can do that by through podcasts and webinars, as an example. And all of this is sort of highly important to enable you to sort of get your message across. And I already said this going back to the SOEP model, can be a blend both of sort of social media and your own owned media and traditional media in the trade press and editorial features. Next slide. So it's all about aligning your social media channels relevant to your objectives and audience. And you really are aiming to stimulate this two-way conversation. And obviously, this is why social media is highly relevant in this way. You can also, importantly, track your success and track that engagement with data analytics and click-throughs, and understanding who's sort of engaging with your story, how they're doing that, for how long, and sort of why that might be, in order to sort of constantly review and improve on that and enhance that. So, basically these digital forms of communication, we're seeing this back to that SOEP model. We're seeing social media being highly sort of valuable here to share your brand story. Obviously, it's at low cost, and it has a global and wider reach. So using digital storytelling to guide consumers through your sustainability story is very important. And many brands are doing this. Obviously, many fashion brands are doing this. And it really enables you to sort of enhance the narrative and co-create the narrative behind your brand's offer. And in a previous of our sort of presentations, we talked about sort of developing target personas and aligning our story with that. So this, and creating these brand communities, and this is really what we're trying to do, and what is we're enabled in that way, particularly through our social media channels, to generate that growing interest in sustainability. We know, as we've expressed in previous presentations, we have an increasingly educated sort of following for our sustainable brands, who want to know, what our story is. They want to see its authenticity. They want to see it substantiated. And this is something we have to sort of bear in mind in terms of how we sort of convey that and ensure authenticity and alignment. So a good example, again, another sort of good case example here is Birdsong. So they, as a brand, started off by getting customers to pay monthly subscriptions to support their brand in exchange for blog posts and exclusive discounts. So you got this real sense of co-creation. It sort of changed the relationship in many ways between the consumer and brand, from one centered around sort of commerce and profit to one focusing on education and shared values, and offering sort of much more beyond. So again, recent resources include sustainable clothing care, transparent costing, recycled polyester. So basically all these posts around the things that, as we've said, they're very engaged consumers, they're very educated consumers around the topic of sustainability might want to hear about, and encourage them to add to your story and question your story. Industry Nations also are another interesting brand example, and they basically work with communities around the world, in India and in Indonesia, as examples, to sort of work with those communities, producing local crafted fashion and artifacts. And they very much use their storytelling around that to highlight how their garments are produced from source, and it's very much sort of, again, a sort of a human-facing story that engages the consumer, that is very sort of transparent, and is very open, and enables the sort of consumer to track the story from sort of from soil to sort of right through to sort of purchase. But again, I think this is really important. This is a trend we are seeing, and obviously we've talked previously about digital product passports and the way that that brands, fashion brands, and textile companies can enable this type of transparency, and Industry of All Nations is a hugely good, important example of that in operation.
Anne, can I just step in there? Do you mind?
Yeah. I
was just going to, because I think this point's really important, and it comes back to something we've talked around previously. It's consumers, especially the kind of external facing stakeholders that we work with, they love the narrative. And I think the more we can build that narrative around sustainability. So the last few examples we've talked about are great examples of that. So that kind of like reaching back into the supply chain, back into the value chain. People are increasingly wanting to know where their products come from. And I think if you can really craft that story and that narrative around the origin of your products, even if it, I mean, we see it in lots of clever ways. You can highlight certain suppliers potentially that you work with. You could highlight a certain member of staff. And there's brands in the UK that are doing this really effectively at the moment. There's a jeans brand called Community Clothing, and they talk around their heritage that's based in a certain county within Northern England. They highlight their staff. So it's that kind of full case transparency of where this product is produced, who is producing it, and actually that sustainability story is hugely strong, and actually really forms the backbone of the brand and the product that is being sold. Sorry, and I'll leave you to it now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we know it's, our research, including our own, we know that this is what consumers want to know about, and they are inspired by it, and it's what you might call the origin story, or the human story of the people and the processes that your products are sort of premised on. And back to Industry of All Nations here, they have this huge commitment to sort of not only also rethink methods of production for consumer goods, bringing products back to the original makers through the implementation of new manufacturing techniques that are highly sustainable and that are local to each place that they work in, and sort of mindful and aligned with those local needs of their employees. So these are things that, as Alana said just now, are really hugely important as sustainability stories. They also resonate. They are obviously you provide the cognitive information in terms of the facts, but also they are quite emotive as well, because it's a human story, and we know that sort of increasingly consumers in certain sort of demographic categories, if not all of them, are really sort of wanting to support these types of efforts and are much more mindful about their consumption habits. So that's really important. So here we have, and again, academics love their models, but this is what we call the Peirson model for digital communications management. It basically enables you to sort of look at the sort of the journey that you're taking your consumer through, enabling you to sort of plan your digital marketing strategy, very targeted and aligned with your consumer, to grow your audience online, to encourage brand interaction, to increase online and offline engagement, and then to ensure that you're building that customer loyalty and advocacy through engagements, and then to check on, again, the tools that help you to do that. So make sure, going back to your SOAP model, to make sure you've got the right sort of channels that are chosen. It's often used as sort of like a checklist, really, to make sure that you're on the right track. And it's valuable because it offers a structured approach to digital, but it can also be non-digital marketing, just marketing, communications management in general, for your sustainability stories, and aligns strategies, again, with consumer behavior and your desired outcomes, your intended outcomes. And again, once again, this key notion of integration, it emphasizes the importance of integrating various of your marketing communication activities. And also it reminds you to, at each stage, evaluate what's going on, not just leave it all to the end, but to be evaluating and checking on consumer engagement and feedback at each stage. So it's very much about evaluating, again, that's my key phrase here, evaluating your messaging. As I said, you should be doing that incrementally and not leaving it all to the end, and measuring the progress as you go of your communications plan. And the Peirson model reminds you to do that. And it enables you to sort of make sure that your story is on track and also accommodate any sort of feedback you may be getting along the way. So it's all a reminder to constantly review your communications objectives and align those with the progress and the development of your sustainability stories and your marketing efforts. All about tracking your communications progress to learn from learning what works well as you go, and basically intensify the good and sort of rework the things that aren't working in terms of getting those messages across. And also in terms of evaluation, it's always a great thing to think about and reflect on at each stage of your communication, what you might do differently next time, because there's nothing that's perfect. It's not a one and done. It is a journey, and you're going on that journey, that communications journey, that storytelling journey with your consumer, with your stakeholders, and you're constantly reflecting at each stage on basically what's working and how your stories are aligning with the core values and beliefs that we've talked about before, to form this effective, authentic, consistent and coherent story that will hopefully enable your consumer and stakeholders to take sustainable actions with you, that you are inviting into that action. So it is also about, thinking about the user, being user-facing, highlighting your successes, gaining sort of recognition for your sustainability achievements and your actions, and you're sort of marking your milestones and sharing the challenges as well. So you can be honest, and we've seen this before. We've in our previous presentations, where we've highlighted brands such as Patagonia or Organi, who are very open and honest about the fact that they are on a sustainability journey, and they can't call themselves a full sustainable brand, that it's something that they are on a journey to sort of achieve, and they can't achieve that unless they have the full sort of cooperation and sort of coordination with their customers and their stakeholders. So this means you're constantly providing updates on your sustainability story to show that you're fulfilling commitments, but you're being honest about what has been achieved and what more needs to be done. So you're developing that incrementally, sharing new content and case studies and stories with your audience. Again, it's not a one and done, it's an ongoing sort of conversation. And obviously you're keeping your stakeholders' attention with new content, keeping them engaged. As we've just said, those sustainability stories can obviously and should have facts and figures and be substantiated with statistics and sort of factual evidence of what your sustainability achievements are, but also have a human focus as well to make them relatable to your stakeholders and customers. So Reformation is another sort of brand example we've chosen here. And they introduced their Carbon is Cancelled campaign in 2019, which offered their consumers, advice on how to reduce and offset their personal carbon footprints. And this is again another good example of that co-creational sort of journey that we go on in our sustainability efforts. Again, this is something that engages consumers. It creates this brand community. It creates following. It creates trust, and it creates this sort of hopefully ongoing relationship with our stakeholders that is so vital to our success in sustainability terms. So it is all about monitoring and tracking our progress, reaching out, asking, are your communications encouraging people to spend longer on your website? Back to what we were saying about monitoring as you go. Have there been an increase in downloads, click-throughs? How long are people spending there? Have you included sustainability information in a consistent way across all your platforms? In terms of interaction, thinking about, is your business, what does that engagement look like in terms of likes, comments, shares? What is the content of those? How can you then update your own story in the light of that? And also our customers responding to your story. That's really important, and in what way and why. And then the reputational aspect is critical. I talked earlier about getting sort of credit for doing good sustainability things. Well, again, think about that in terms of how your sort of communication efforts have generated a change in sentiment that you can sort of monitor in terms of understanding or looking at the content of the responses and how people have responded, from individual consumers to media, in terms of maybe the stories you might get covered in, or the invitations to have media interviews. And ultimately, we're all aiming for behaviour change. That's what communication does. It can't do that without changing people's sort of headspace, without changing their emotions, but also, ultimately, we're really wanting to sort of see if consumers are engaging with our brand. Are they buying into it, and how many that might be? But also, it's not just about that. It's, as we've seen from the brands that we've highlighted in the cases, it's more about changing the consumer's sort of approach to sustainability and getting support for that, and ensuring that you have those sort of, you're aligned, your sustainability efforts as a brand are aligned with your consumers' values, which will be reflected in how they sort of follow and talk about you and engage with you, and ultimately, obviously, buy into your products. So Everlane is another good example of that. The challenge was cleaning up their denim production, making it more sustainable. They did this, as they've said here, in a campaign they called the Quest for Radical Transparency, partnering with the best ethical factories around the world. Again, paralleling back to that industry of nations case in terms of their sort of objectives, sourcing the best materials, and then they shared those stories, again, in a transparent way with their consumers, enabling them to understand the true cost of every product that was made from origin right through to sort of point of sale. And this, again, has been sort of highly successful. And finally, just showing that small is beautiful in sustainability. And, we've highlighted across our 3 presentations a whole range of examples of fashion brands that are doing sustainability well and communicating sustainability well. And they have been at all market levels. And this is a small SME, basically, based in the US in Brooklyn, and it's called Zero Waste Daniel. And all products are including in production are reused, nothing sent to landfill. It's 100% sustainable fashion brand. Now, arguably, as a small organization, an SME could achieve that maybe more in a sort of in a faster way, perhaps, or in a more engaged way. But it obviously shows that all brands can do this, and all brands have commitments in their own way, have their own sustainability story to tell in that regard. So as the sort of Daniel Silverstein, the founder, said, it comes down to one question: when are we going to be ready to accept the way that changes our relationship with production and consumption, and focus on clothing with no electricity, no chemicals, that aren't sort of synthetic based, and that are moving towards 100% sustainability.
I'm going to take us to the end, I think. So we wanted to leave today on a final 3 slides, really. And when Anne and I were putting this final presentation together, we were very much reflecting on what's come previously, looking back to the first 2 presentations to really kind of think, what do we want to leave our audience with? What are our kind of key takeaways? And we've tried to summarize 3 very full presentations into kind of 3 core takeaways, really. So we wanted to take you back to the very beginning, to think about communication principles in practice. So this was featured in webinar 1, and this was the kind of core foundations, I guess. So we talked around stage 1, which is the preparing. So really understanding what your sustainability values are, how you're going to communicate them effectively, and thinking about how to create that transparency. I feel like we've talked around transparency quite a lot today in a very kind of discrete way. So I mean, we've talked around these great examples, but if we think about what their commonality is, it's all about transparency and doing that in a very authentic and true and meaningful way. So we spent a lot of time back in webinar 1 talking about creating those sustainability messages. And again, we're hoping that these examples that we're kind of bringing to the table can inspire you. As Anne said, we've chosen these for very particular reasons and at multiple market levels, at multiple geographical locations, to really start to highlight to you all that our sustainability journeys are very unique. They're very different, regardless of size and location. These core messages really do ring true to everybody. Stage 3, we talked around what those key messages are. So once you've understood really what your values are, you've thought about how to do that in a very transparent way, thinking about what those key messages are and how we're going to get them across. And then stage 4, we've talked a lot about that evaluation today. So we also think about evaluation from an impact sense as well. So we're thinking around communication in a meaningful, authentic way, as we've discussed, but actually evaluating the effects of that communication. So not only in a user engagement way, as we touched upon with social media, but also thinking what are those long-term impacts? A couple of slides ago, Anne was really focusing on the ultimate goal being that behaviour change. And I think that this evaluation of impact really starts to hone in on how we evaluate what and how that behaviour change has happened. So just to summarise, it's around convincing, factual, science-based, relatable messages. Obviously, we're wanting to keep these messages very true, very factual, very reliable as well, and very kind of substantiated is the word I was looking for. So these messages have to be really kind of credible and true. We think about the impact. So again, that impact on not only engagement and how effective that messaging is, but actually the longer term, what effect is this having on behaviour change and the longer term kind of more sustainability goals. We're recalibrating socio-cultural values. So again, one of the earlier examples that we touched upon was really kind of shifting and creating that shift around the way we think about sustainability as various different stakeholders. So, I mean, I think we can all identify as being a user or a consumer, but we're also invested stakeholders within this as well. So we kind of wear multiple hats, and thinking about how those relationships really are crucial to that integration. But enabling advocacy as well, and that comes back to that substantiation of messaging. So thinking about not being overly preachy, but really relating to our audience. And again, those some of the conversations we had earlier were about really understanding our audience and appealing to them on multiple levels. So not just the kind of fact-based science hard data, but that very emotive and social level as well. So our kind of second summary was very much around preparing, communicating and activating. So again, Anne and I have really tried to think about these webinars as a process. So it's not just kind of a presentation of theory and this is what you should do, but actually how you can enact this in a very staged and manageable and appealing way, I guess. I mean, we talk to a lot of brands on a daily basis, and some of them have really kind of got themselves together. They really understand what they need to be doing and where they need to be going. But for many companies, especially smaller companies that we work with, this is a scary prospect. So we've tried to really break this down into manageable steps and really acknowledge that everyone is at a very different stage in their sustainability journey, regardless of kind of size, location, sector. So we're hoping that that's kind of really come across in our messaging as well. So we talked a lot around regulations. Obviously, this is the kind of top down, the parameters that we're working within. So we really wanted to come back to the conversations we had around regulatory frameworks. And obviously that was to do with location and challenges, ownership, the particular sector, and obviously size. And again, different regulations and different legislation will speak to and apply to different audiences. So keep that in mind as we go through as well. We were talking about being reputation focused, and again, Anne mentioned reputation a few moments ago, but obviously this effective sustainable communication really relies on maintaining that reputation. So it's about, again, it comes back to authenticity, about communicating the values that your company and your employees really kind of believe in and want to live and outwardly communicate through their messaging. But it's about expectations as well. So it's about response to social and environmental risk and opportunities. And again, it's acknowledging that landscape that we sit in. I mentioned right at the very beginning around the fact that we're in a very fluid landscape at the moment, and that agility is really key when it comes to not only kind of sustainable actions, but the communication around that as well. So we just wanted to end today on a bit of a checklist. And again, this comes back to the veracity of sustainability claims. This is a slide we have touched on before, but we thought as our kind of key takeaway, we really wanted to leave you with a very simple key takeaway, a key checklist that, again, that you can come back to time and time again. So number one, truthful, accurate, science-based, factual. Again, this has been a really core message throughout all three presentations. What you're saying has to be true, and it has to be substantiated. You have to be able to substantiate what you're saying. And again, that is obviously in complete avoidance of any kind of greenwashing. Your messaging should be clear and unambiguous. I think we've all experienced as a user very unclear messaging. You kind of see it or engage with a social media post or an advertisement or even a website, and we're not quite clear what that message is. And again, that kind of, it sets us up a little bit as users. We think, if I don't really understand that, do I actually trust that? So again, the clear and accurate and factual messages is really related to trust as well. So obviously we've talked about transparency, and number three is around that. So we want to avoid omitting or hiding any information. The kind of trust that you want to build with your audience is based on that full disclosure, that full transparency. So wherever possible in your sustainability messagings, it's about being honest and truthful and clear to your audiences. Number four, using fair and meaningful comparisons and connections. So obviously with sustainability, and again in Anne and I's work, it comes up time and time again, these sets of data, actually to users and the general public, this is largely meaningless. We don't know what a ton of carbon looks like. What does that relate to? And that is where these comparisons and these kind of comparative examples can be really, really powerful. So again, we spoke about this, I think, in the last presentation. So think about how you can create those comparisons and how you can make that information more meaningful. Obviously, considering a full life cycle approach of your product and service through life cycle assessment, really important. And again, it comes back to point number one. So how do we find that truthful, accurate, science-based, factual data? And again, it needs to be backed up with rigorous methodologies, one of which, of course, is life cycle assessment throughout the supply chain. And finally, substantiated, a word that we come back to time and time again, and grounded messaging. So again, we kind of think that summarizes exactly what we're trying to get across in these last three webinars. And it has to be a truthful claim. That's essentially what sustainability messaging is all around. So we're going to leave it there, but we hope that the last three webinars have been useful